This is High Tech High Unboxed. I'm Alec Patton, and we are coming to you live from the National Summit for Improvement in Education, happening at the same time in San Diego as the Deeper Learning Conference. The name of this session is The Mississippi Miracle Demystified, and it's being moderated by Derek Mitchell. I'm going to leave you in his capable hands from here on out.
Good morning, everyone. It's great to see you all. Thank you for being here this morning, and would you help me welcome two of the most extraordinary young people I've met in recent weeks, who are two of the many architects of what folks are calling the Mississippi Miracle, Dr. Tenette Smith and Dr. Elise Brown. We're going to engage in a bit of a conversation about what has happened in Mississippi. There's an ongoing conversation in the National Coalition for the Improvement in Education about what constitutes thrilling results. And I don't know of another example that would be thrilling results than what has happened in the state of Mississippi. It's gone from 49th and 50th in elementary reading for decades to top 10. It's a growth that has never happened as long as the assessments have been happening. The closest has been Kentucky. Kentucky went from the mid-30s to the top 10. What these folks have accomplished, and it took a long time and a lot of work. So it's not a miracle, which is why we're here to kind of decouple and demystify it. And so we're going to start first with understanding a little bit about the young people who are here with us today. So Dr. Smith, one of the things we do at NC is we talk about why we're improvers. I'll model it for you, but as I do, can you then tell us a little bit about yourself, about why you do this work, and then pass the mic on. And so I'm Derek Mitchell. I'm an improver because I believe anything worth doing is worth doing well. And since nothing is done exactly right the first time, you have to improve stuff in order to actually do them well. And so that's why I do what I do. That's what excites me. That's what brings me joy. And I'm really happy to be here.
Thank you, Derek. Well, you said young people, so I thank you for that. But after, over 33 years of serving students and parents and the community in Mississippi, I am an improver because I believe that I've seen what happens when we underestimate children, right? And conversely, I've seen how quickly the narrative can change when adults come together with clarity, with purpose, with a sense of belief in what we can do. And that experience shaped me, and it's taught me to that improvement isn't an option, it's a responsibility. It's a responsibility that we all have for every kiddo in the United States. And in the last 2 years in Maryland, that same commitment, it followed me into what we do now. And so as I work through this landscape of education, I'm constantly learning and adjusting and aligning and making sure that our systems rise to meet what every kiddo needs.
Good morning. I'm Elise Brown. I am an improver because I like to go slow and think strategically as we build out systems. I have been in education for almost 20 years now, so also not a spring chicken. But in my time, I have had several opportunities to build programs from the ground up, starting from just teaching, moving in as a math professional development coordinator, and then building a whole digital coaching program in Mississippi. During that time, having the gap of leadership after Dr. Wright left led me to Maryland along with Dr. Smith because I just wanted to work with like-minded individuals who really tackle hard problems in a strategic way.
Wonderful. Well, let's talk about Mississippi for a minute,
Yes.
because Mississippi is an incredibly amazing place. And I don't know if our audience has ever had a chance to visit there. How many of you guys have visited Mississippi? Yeah, we've got some folks who have a sense of it. And so tell us about the context that this work happened in.
Well, Mississippi is, it's a community base. It's very grounded in community, right? In relationships. Trust matters in Mississippi. They have to trust that you have their best interest at heart, right? When I first came to Mississippi, or when we first started the initiative, one of the big conversations was this law, this initiative will impact only our Black and brown and our poor children, right? This is going to be horrible for the most at-risk students. And Dr. Kimiana Burke and I, we were adamant that the initiative of what we were building would have a positive impact on every kid in the state, not just our poorest of the poor. So Mississippi is our community, it's community minded. It's, yeah, grounded in a sense of purpose, right?
Yes, and I would say there's an assumption about the South, about Mississippi, but even within the state, there are probably 6 very unique regions
Yep.
that you'd have to approach differently. And there was a lot of community outreach and explaining of how students would benefit from the strategies that we were putting in place, from the policy to the professional learning to the coaching. Everything had rationale behind it, and it was in the best interest of those students.
Yeah. In Mississippi, we started out with the Literacy-Based Promotion Act in 2013. Mind you, Derek has told you that we were 49th when I started, and the people were, all over the country. Well, especially Louisiana and Alabama. At least we're not Mississippi, right? Because they were 48th, 47th. They flip-flopped. But we were constantly at the bottom. And in 2013, the governor, who was Phil Bryant at the time, who was also dyslexic, said, we have to do something better. And so Senator Tollison, along with policymakers and from one of the leading think tanks, they came together and proposed this initiative, the Literacy-Based Promotion Act, which would require students to be able to read at a certain level, proficiency level, by the end of 3rd grade. Again, people were up at arms, and the community was up at arms. And we did a lot of outreach. We did a lot of communication. Our communication policy was top notch because we knew we had to get out and sort of dispel some of the myths around what we were doing. We're not trying to retain every kid in Mississippi. We're trying to intervene and prevent retention. And so we changed the narrative around what we were doing. This is not a retention policy. This is a prevention policy. And so we sort of embraced that. And the one thing I think people have to remember is that 65% of the students in Mississippi public schools are students of color. Conversely, people of color only make up 37% of the population in Mississippi. So I think that's very, very important for you to wrap your minds around, right? Smaller part of the population, but the larger part in the public school setting. That means that we had a lot of students who, more affluent students who were in some of the race-based private school settings that were initiated in 68, 67 during integration. And so that's still very pervasive in many parts of Mississippi. Again, we wanted to ensure that the poorest kids, regardless of their zip codes, regardless of where they were located in the state, had access to quality instruction across the board.
Well, I would say that as it happened, I was working, my organization, Partners in School Innovation, was supporting schools in Indianola, in the Delta in Mississippi at the time when this policy passed. And I got to tell you, it was terrifying for district leaders and teachers. The thought is that your 3rd grade is just going to balloon, right? Because you're not allowed to promote them if they're not able to read. And they were promoting a lot of young people who really weren't able to read. And so there was a lot of fear and a lot of worry. But very soon after, a lot of support happened. And so let's talk about what it is the state did once after you've made that You passed that law. You then provided us an incredible amount of support to schools and districts. Let's talk about those pieces.
Dr. Carey Wright was the superintendent at the time, and we had a groundswell of community activism to coming in to say, no, 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 we can't do this. And so our state board said, no, you can't talk to the activists. You can't talk to any of the advocates because that's not what we do here in Mississippi. Carey Wright, being Carey Wright, anybody who knows her is like, yes, I will, and yes, we will partner with them. And so we started to have these community outreach nights with our advocacy groups and started to answer some of those questions and ask questions of the community. And the main question or the biggest question we asked was of parents. Raise your hand if you don't want your third grader to know how to read by the end of third grade. No parent is going to raise their hand, right? Every parent wants the best for their kid, and that's the message that we had to send to them. We don't want to retain your kids. We want to make sure that your children are receiving quality instruction as soon as they walk through the door of an elementary school, pre-K through grade 12. And think that was an essential piece that communications the strategy.
No, I would agree with that. I think that we had a lot of work to do with Tier 1 instruction, though, because we didn't want to live in intervention. We needed to make sure teachers were equipped from day one to do what they needed to do. We had a high-quality instructional materials push to make sure that every teacher had the best materials in their classroom, but they were also trained on how to use them. You can't just put materials in front of a teacher and hope that miracles happen.
Yeah.
So along with our HQIM push, we also had our professional development coordinators, boots on the ground, going into schools across the state where principals or superintendents could request to come have free professional learning in their building. So we would travel. I lived at the very top of the state, just south of Memphis. I would drive 6 hours down to the bottom of the state to support any teacher that needed me. So we had the PL push, we had the HQIM, we had our science of reading trainings, and then came along the coaches.
Yeah. So, but let me push back on that because you have to remember when we started the LPPA, we had nothing. Yeah, we were building the plane as we were flying it. They hired, as they were trying to recruit people to become coaches, LPPA passed in 2013. They were trying to recruit people. They interviewed over 600 people, right? Of the 600 people, they asked, name the 5 components of reading and give me a strategy that you could use to support a kiddo who is struggling in one of those components. Only 24 people were able to answer that question. Okay, so 600 people, and we're talking about administrators, teachers, IHE, Institution of Higher Ed, professors, right, in our reading classrooms. They were not able to answer that question. And so they hired us 24 people because the governor said, we want 75 coaches and we want them deployed right now. 24 people, so we said, okay, this tells us that there is a capacity issue within the state. And so we knew that we had to build our teachers' understanding of what the science of reading was all about, what the research tells us are good practices for teaching reading. And so that became our first lever. So we built that initially, and then we didn't have very much money. They only gave us $9 million the first year. And so we deployed with the $9 million and we went out and did an audit of what schools were using in their classrooms. Well, lo and behold, they didn't have instructional material, high quality instructional material. They had whatever, and they piecemealed. And as a state with a very little, small amount of money, we knew that we had to help them identify those gaps. And so we started piecemealing things. We Frankenstein curriculums for the first 2 years. And then at that third year, we sort of pivoted to the HQIM. It's like, 2016-ish. We sort of pivoted and looked at aligning more of that HQIM with our instruction.
So let me be sure you understand. So you deployed literacy coaching from the state directly to the school,
Correct?
bypassing the school district.
Yep. Yes.
Wow.
Yes. And believe me, there was a pushback, right? You know, you're sending people into our schools. You're coming to get us, right? And so we had to change the perception of what it meant to have the state in your schools. Our literacy coaches were there as support, non-evaluative coaching supports for our schools that were the lowest performing schools in ELA, third grade ELA. That was our, initial inroads. So we used a methodology wherein we took 2 years of third grade ELA data, rank ordered them, averaged them, rank ordered the schools, and then we deployed directly to the schools, not the LEA, not the district, but to the schools in and of itself, recognizing that we're going to get more traction if we improve this school, and hopefully the other schools around them will see the gains and want to improve, right?
As an improver, one of the things we talk about is reducing variation, and that was clearly a strategy to level up coaching that's provided directly to schools. Let's talk about some of the pitfalls of implementing that strategy, because I know, having talked to the both of you, that there are some huge challenges with implementing and then, of course, sustaining that policy. And also that no social promotion legislation was repealed or stopped at some point, right? Mm-hmm. And so let's talk about what happened when that happened.
Give it to you. Yeah, you start.
So going straight to the school means there's going to be a little tension. You're in the state, you're walking into a building, and I will speak from my perspective. When I started, there was not a good reputation at the Mississippi Department of Education, and we had a lot of work to do to repair relationships. Working with the principal and building that relationship while keeping teacher practice safe, like between a coach and a principal, and not sharing too much information about what's going on in the classroom, really helped build the relationships with teacher to see the change in practice, which then led to the principal trusting the coach in the building a whole lot more. So from my end, it was just getting doors open. That was one of our biggest challenges.
Elise brings a different perspective. Elise was a coach actually in the schools, right? So she was one of the people that we deployed to go out and to support. She was a digital learning coach. We had under my purview, we had literacy coaches, early childhood coaches, special education coaches, school improvement coaches, as well as digital learning coaches.
Math
MTSS.
coaches,
MTSS, and data coaches.
You say leadership?
Oh, and leadership coaches.
So,
yeah, we expanded. Of course, that came, a few years later. But in the beginning, there was just the literacy coaching initiative. But we recognized the power of coaching, the non-evaluative piece, the supportive piece, and people actually recognize that as well. But we did have a lot of pushback there. We had schools who were in Mississippi. There was a law that said if your school district was rated A or B, that you didn't have to accept supports from the state. And so we had pushback from those A-B districts. Now, mind you, they had F schools within those districts. But because those students' scores were masked by the more affluent parts of the district, they felt they didn't need it. Once we finally gained inroads into those F-rated schools in those A-B districts, and they saw this F district outperform this A school, this F school outperform this A school in the same district, I'm like, wait, what's happening? This school today is still outperforming those A-rated schools. Yes, you can give them a big snap, because it was like pulling teeth, because not only were they pushing back on that, but they were heavily invested in balanced literacy, right? So they had huge libraries of the Lucy Calkin books, and they were adamant on not giving those up, right? We're not giving this up. We're seeing great results. But who are you seeing results from? Are you seeing results because of, or are you seeing results in spite of? And it was definitely in spite of. So,
What about when you no longer had the policy driver of no social promotion? How was it? Did it impede the work? Did it have no impact?
I don't think the no social promotion policy really impacted or had the negative type of impact people would expect. Because we were framing this around intervention, because we were framing this around providing quality tier one instruction, and we recognize, yeah, Elise, you're right. You can't tear your way out of, a hole, right? And so we continue to promote and provide quality. We grounded all of our work around three legs: professional learning, HQIM, and intervention. And those three key pieces, along with providing access to quality early childhood programming. Mind you, when we started in 2013, we did not have any early childhood programming.
In fact, you didn't even have kinder in many places in the state.
Yeah, many
right?
places. But kindergarten is still not a mandatory requirement in Mississippi. Once you enter kindergarten, then you are mandatorily required to attend, but you're not required to attend kindergarten. 80% of the students in the state do, but when Dr. Wright started, there was a big newspaper article. Carrie Wright comes from the north to snatch children from the arms of their mothers, right? She's like, no, I just want them to have quality early childhood programming, right? So, they've changed the tune. Right now, Mississippi invests probably over $50 million, which is huge considering they started with a $4 million investment. $50 million a year in early childhood programming is, quite substantial.
Let's talk about policy for a minute, because I think it's important for folks to understand the context. In Mississippi at that time, there was also a policy that required families who were getting assistance, that if their students were in school, it impacted how much assistance they got. I mean, because ideologically, you think, well, they're getting 2 meals in school, so they don't need as much, welfare assistance. And so families would keep their kids home in order to actually maximize access to their welfare benefits. So it's a strange situation where the learning of your child is being impeded, by the resources that you need to feed and house them, right? Mm-hmm. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, that policy also had some unintended consequences, right? So we had to really shift people's mindset around providing access to nutritional, assistance. And so we saw an increase in our chronic absenteeism rate because parents were keeping their kids home. And so now the legislators had to go back and rethink, okay, maybe we may not need to connect that back because now our chronic absenteeism rate is one of the highest in the country. And so we had to do a lot of explaining to our General Assembly, you don't want to legislate everything. It was a huge shift. Our policies in 2013, when that policy went into place, there was the policy for early childhood, a policy for dyslexia screening across the state, a policy for the literacy initiative, as well as a policy for interventions. So they had a very heavy hand in education, and I think Carrie Wright's leadership sort of put a pause to that because her thing was, let us handle the education part, right? You guys just help fund it. We'll help you sort of guide you in writing this legislation that will actively or actually increase our student outcomes.
So let's summarize quickly. So you implemented policy that created the inertia to concentrate on the science of reading, and to make sure students can read beyond third grade. You centralized coaching so that you provided intensive support for schools that are not meeting standard in coaching. You centralized high quality instructional materials and made those available across the state to schools and districts so that you knew that they had access to the materials that are science of reading and related sets of materials. And then you provided centrally deployed professional development structures for all teachers and leaders, and then coaching in various content areas, all from the state,
Correct.
across the state,
Right.
right? That led to some great results. Let's talk about those real quick. So what are you most excited about in terms of the successes of this initiative? What brings you the most pride?
For me, it's the change in teacher knowledge and the change in their confidence. It's also, I think, the measurable improvements in student outcomes. Our students of color and our economically disadvantaged students outperform those students, their peers across the United States. So for me, that is a very big source of pride because, again, our most at-risk students they're doing it, right? They're actually performing. And coming from Mississippi and going into a state that is very, very blue, Mississippi, big, super red, right? Majority red. And going to a very blue state where you see people say, poor children learn differently. Do they really? Right? Or, you have to teach, students of color differently. Do you really? So I have a very strong sense of pride that in a deeply red state, that their sense of pride of what they're doing for all students, regardless of where they live, is quality, right?
100% agree. I think just the fact of where we are politically as a country, a state like Mississippi coming together and agreeing that our children come first was huge. And it's why that Mississippi is not just top 10 right now.
No.
When you account for poverty, it's number one in the country. So I just want to throw that out there. If those children can do it, we can do it everywhere. I would also say I'm most proud of the sustainability of it.
Yes.
This has been ongoing. It was not a miracle. It is a marathon, and the momentum keeps going. And that just shows if you put in the work, if you stick with it, you're going to see those outcomes. But you have to have that strategy in place, and you have to think through how all those systems play together.
Yeah, we didn't give up once something didn't work. It was persistence. It was coherent. The professional learning, you partner all of that together. And we didn't try to jump on the bandwagon of every new thing that came along. We stayed the course. And I think in education, we do have a tendency to sort of shift. Oh, this didn't work. 2 years down the road, 3 years down, this didn't work. So we're going to shift our focus. We stayed the course and we did not give up until we made those small tweaks. We pivoted slightly. This was a huge ship. You can't turn a ship on a dime, right? You have to make small incremental changes in your trajectory. And that's what we did to ensure that we had the sustainability. We're still going strong, right? Yeah. I've been gone for 2 years. The people that we put in place, I'm poaching people left and right, if I can, right? But the people we put in place are still there, and they're still making great strides to still increase student outcomes.
Wonderful. So you are now both working to try to replicate this success in an entirely new context in the state of Maryland. Very different, as you mentioned, from red to blue or purplish depending upon the year. Tell us a little about how that's going. How is it going? What barriers are you facing that you wouldn't have anticipated?
That's a deep breath, deep sigh kind of moment. Um, we're trying to replicate what we did in Mississippi, but we recognize that it's not a cut and paste type of thing, right? Take what we did in Mississippi and we're just going to drop it into Maryland. There are so many additional contexts that we have to consider coming from a right to work state, at will state in Mississippi, to a very heavily unionized state. 24 different unions with 24 different collective bargaining agreements. It was something that I was not prepared for. Nobody told me about this part. But I think we're making inroads.
Maryland's also in a different starting point. So Maryland has over 800 coaches already spread out across their districts, where Mississippi didn't have that. And so there is a strong starting point for us. So we're looking at, how do we build state level coaches to get in where we need to provide that direct support, but also how do we support the coaches that are already out there to make sure that we are limiting variation and they are getting the best training so that they can support the teachers that they work with. But yes, there are very different tools at play that we're learning as we go.
Yeah. Additionally, Maryland also has a very high adoption rate of HQIM. Mississippi, of course, when we started, we didn't have any, right? So they adopted material during COVID. Their implementation rate is very low. Additionally, Maryland also invested quite a bit of ESSER funding into providing science of reading training, right? So teachers have a different starting point, right? They have a more level playing field, so to speak. So their content knowledge is higher than what we started with in Mississippi. So just making the programming more coherent.
The resources are there. It's the time that becomes the issue. Time to train, time to have access to teachers, that has become the issue. So really, to your point, we are a high adoption state. We have, I think it's over 75% of our schools have already adopted HQIM, but when we look at our implementation rates, it drops down to 30% of our teachers are using them regularly the way they're intended. So that's the importance of a coach, though, to make sure the teacher feels supported, that they understand how to use it day to day so that they're not over supplementing, that they're not over scaffolding for their students. And we just have that work to do.
I think also changing their mindsets as well. There's a mindset shift that we have to build in Maryland. A new RAND study in 2025 says that our teachers in Maryland have some of the lowest beliefs in what our students are able to do. And so shifting our teachers, helping them to understand that, yes, our kiddos can use those HQIM. They are not too difficult. They are on grade level. So we want them to provide that on grade level instruction. So when we came through the door, Dr. Wright said, okay, we need to revise and review our standards. So we went through the last year and a half, we have been on a roll. We revised.
I'm tired, y'all.
Every standard?
We've done ELA, math, science, social studies, PE, health, and we're working on arts and world languages in our secondary math pathways. So we have been very busy looking at our standards, making sure that we have aligned what we expect our students to know and understand. We've also added an early literacy policy. We're working on our adolescent literacy policy, and we passed our K-12 math policy, which requires 60 minutes of math instruction for K through 8.
So very busy.
Wow, that does sound busy. So in Mississippi, you could mandate, for the word, professional development. In Maryland, you have to negotiate for the time to do that. And so, but as you know, if you're not able to build up quality by providing coherent professional learning across the board, and reduce variation by building the skills of the related coaching structures, you're unlikely to get the same kind of thrilling results. So new skills you need to build. You need to have new negotiating skills, new relationships,
New relationships.
with collective bargaining partners and enrolling them. How are you enrolling them in the work? How is it going to bring them in a team?
I'll pass this to our Assistant Superintendent of Instructional Programs.
Coming in as an outsider into a new state, it's taken a lot of time to build relationships, to get them to trust us. And we've had to really omit saying, in Mississippi, we did this. They don't like that too much. So we learned very quickly that we just have to take a step back and celebrate what we've been doing in Maryland that has been working, and then gently nudge in the direction that we need to go. I think we've made a lot of progress this year. We have several groups that we bring together. Since we only have 24 districts, it's a lot easier than in Mississippi, I will say. So Dr. Wright has her superintendent's work group. We bring together the chief academic officers and assistant superintendents every month to get them in the room. We have our content supervisors that meet individually quarterly. So we're really pulling people together. Their biggest push has been for us to be aligned at the agency, which I think is very normal at any state. They often ask, do you guys even talk to each other? So we've been really working on coherence and taking a step back and saying, these policies are misaligned. We have to fix something. We can't expect them to figure it out at the district level. What are we going to do to make their experiences better? And that's gone a long way with building relationships with them and getting them on board for the change.
I think also in Mississippi to Maryland, Mississippi, we had the State Board of Education, right? We were working in alignment, lockstep with the MDE, State Board of Education. In Maryland, there are two boards. There's the Accountability and Implementation Board, which oversees the implementation of the multi-billion-dollar investment into Maryland's education system, the blueprint for Maryland's future. And there is the Maryland State Board of Education. And so delineating the responsibilities of these two boards has been imperative for pushing or moving the work. We have to let the AIB know that this is your swim lane and you're going to stay in your swim lane and we will swim in ours. And ours is around instruction as well as the implementation of the blueprint. Yours is to ensure that there's accountability around the spending of the funding, the money around the blueprint. So that in and of itself was, again, a paradigm shift for me to answer to two boards.
Wow.
Yeah.
Sounds very complicated.
Very.
So we reached a point where we can start the Q&A. So all of you who have a question for our guests, please go ahead and raise your hand, and Alec will bring the mic. So please don't start speaking until you have the mic in front of you. Go ahead, Alec.
Start with you, sir.
Thank you so much. This was really, really enlightening. And I would love for you to share a little bit more about where you would expect Mississippi to be 10 years from now. Behind that question is what lasting capability looks like and where that lives in the system.
In 10 years from now, I expect Mississippi, I hope that Mississippi maintains its current level trajectory. This is recorded, right?
Don't let the skeptic in.
Oh, I won't let the
Skeptic
skeptic in. I just say that leadership matters, right? And so consistently ensuring that the focus of quality instruction remains at the forefront of everything that they do is imperative. And right now, that leadership is focused on that. And so in 10 years, they may have a new superintendent. I just want them to continue to focus on ensuring that kiddos across the state have access to quality instruction.
I was going to say leadership matters. I want, my heart is still in Mississippi. I want nothing but the best for them. And it's going to take a strong leader to not come in, see a new shiny object, and shift course. So I really hope that they stay the course that's been set for them.
Buenos dias. Thank you so much for just such inspiring work. We had the opportunity to look at Mississippi when making our shift, so a really incredible case. My question is around the capacity of your coaches. What did the coaching cycles consist of, and how did you manage change without the, I'm going to assume, consistent presence, given that there were 24 across the state?
Well, okay, so yeah, let me just clarify. We started with 24. However, by 2016, we reached around 87 coaches deployed across the state. Dr. Wright went back across the street to that's what we called, going to the legislators, and they said, okay, give us more money. We started with 9 million, they gave us 18. And so we were able to deploy more coaches across the state. We got up to 87, then COVID hit. And so we had a lot of people decide, okay, you know what? I think I want to go back to my school. I think I want to be an administrator. We had a lot of coaches. What we hoped to do with our coaching initiative was to build this cadre of experts and then send them back to their schools so that they could build their school's capacity, right? And so we had a lot to transition back into their local education agency, as well as to back into schools. Dr. Brown, talk a little bit about what you saw.
Training's really important to us. I'll say in Maryland coming in, we've tried to, or existing are several Frankenstein coaching models. So we've really tried to take a step back, select a coaching model, and train on it. We hold, even in Mississippi, we held monthly coaching meetings where all of the coaches across the state came together in a centralized location in person to not only receive knowledge, but also work through problems of practice. And that was really important for them to get to role play and discuss what challenges they were seeing and kind of talk through how do you deal with this situation on the spot. So those monthly trainings happened for all of our coaching programs, and that was really huge. We also had a moment where we pulled every coach in the state, which was over 100 coaches, that we had 150 coaches came together in the space to talk about our work and how we align, so that if they have a digital coach, but they also have a literacy coach, those experiences are not completely different. We wanted to make sure PLCs were being done consistency. Learning walks were looking for consistent things. So a lot of the work was just coherence work, which really mattered for us.
Bunch of questions in the back.
Oh, okay. Good morning. My name is Carmen, and I'm actually a Maryland resident. So glad to hear about all the work going on in Maryland. I have 2 kiddos in Maryland public schools, 8th and 5th graders. And so my question for you is, how can families support the initiatives and the implementation of high quality instruction? And do you have any strategies or things that we can be doing? I'm also with the PTA, so I would love to take things back to my community.
You are just in time. We're about to receive or release our family guides for student success. So we're going to have K through 8 guides available that go through our literacy and math standards with activities that you can do at home. We're going to do some community pushes along with that this summer. So stay tuned.
So this is a strategy that we employed in Mississippi, and we got very good feedback around the use of having those conversations with parents. So we talked to parents in Mississippi about, as you are going to your parent-teacher conferences, these are questions that you need to ask, right? This is the screener that your child should be provided at the beginning of the year, middle of the year, end of year. And these are questions that you should ask around your screeners. These are questions that you should ask around what interventions are being provided to your kiddo. So we plan to deploy a similar strategy in Maryland as well. Some of the things we will cut and paste from Mississippi. We'll just Marylandize them, right?
Thank you so much for sharing today. I had a question about one-to-one technology. I'm wondering, in Mississippi, and then as you look ahead, what role one-to-one technology you think will play in a K-5 kind of literacy space, or specifically maybe K-2? And then also, like, thinking about it in small group setting or like centers, which are so common in those spaces.
So I will start, and then I'm going to pass it to my digital expert. In Mississippi, Dr. Wright, when COVID hit, the one thing that she did very quickly was to ensure that every kid in Mississippi had access to a computer. So while everybody else was waiting on their computers to be delivered, we actually were, because she placed her order so early, and for so many, we were actually ahead of the game. And our children were able to have access to the computers. We deployed the school buses with the hotspots. Right. But the other thing that we did, I think, is that we recognized that some places in the Mississippi Delta would not, even with a hotspot, be able to access the internet or to be able to utilize the technology. So we had to find low-tech ways to get information to families. So we partnered with the Mississippi Public Television, and I had over 600 lessons recorded and made available to parents. So from 7 to 8 o'clock pre-K, instruction was being aired on Mississippi Public Television. From 8 to 9, we had first grade instruction being aired. And so we did that for the entire duration of COVID. And that's why when we came out of COVID, you didn't see, one of the reasons, you didn't see as big of a gap, or we didn't have as much of a delay in learning. And so the use of technology is important in that K-2 space, but I think it's also important to recognize that there has to be some guardrails for our youngest learners as far as screen time is concerned. In Maryland, there is a big push to limit screen time. And so we are developing some guidance around that, those policies around for our youngest learners.
I'll just say what Mississippi did was incredible. By November, every student had a computer in their hands, and we had 30 digital coaches deployed across the state to support teachers with understanding not just the basics of how to use that computer, but like how to incorporate strong pedagogical practices with it to make sure that the computer was not distracting from the content. And I would say that's why we did not see that backslide from COVID. So that was a huge push that we made. It's not where we want to live, though, right? It was a Band-Aid in a situation, but we know students need print books in front of them. They need to be handwriting so that they're retaining information. So there's a time and a place, and we just need to, as a state agency, provide guidance and guardrails for responsible use.
We have time for a couple more questions.
Hi, thank you. Incredible work. I'm Dr. Erin Bailey. I'm with Reading is Fundamental, and through federal earmarks, we were able to put print books in the hands of all the children in Mississippi. Book access is always an indicator of reading achievement. So we like to think we were part of your strategy as well. My question goes back to what you said about the 24, I think, out of 600 teachers that were able to identify the 5 pillars from the National Reading Panel.
Yes.
I'm a former literacy professor, so I'm always asking this question. Why don't teachers know how to teach reading? Is there something we should be doing in teacher preparation so that we don't have to go in and do this intensive coaching and training all the time?
Personally, I think it does start with our teacher preparation programs. It can start there. Just reflecting back when I came out of my preparation program, no one taught me how to teach reading, right? We were told to develop a lesson plan on some random topic, and I did what I was told, but no one taught me how to even use the instructional material. And you have to remember too, back when I was coming up, some 30-something odd years ago, the instructional material was seen as a resource, and so you didn't use it from cover to cover. You just, you cherry picked lessons. And that cherry picking of lessons really does not yield the type of outcomes that you expect, because you were going by your district's their blueprint, right? So yeah, it was disjointed across the board. There was no coherence in it, and I we know better. You live longer, you know better, and you look at the instructional material that has been developed right now. It's a better quality than what we had some 30-something odd years ago. So, then nothing else.
Good morning. I'm Luis Gomez. How are you? Thank you so much for a truly fascinating story for us today. I have two questions, and they're both about variation. I mean, I think that you all took variation head on and made great progress. First question, you can pick the point in time you like, when you left or some other time. You started this work, the work gained traction. As it gained traction, what did variation look like across the state? How would you characterize that? And the other question, which is also related to variation and sustainability, as you place these third graders in the rest of the system in fourth, fifth grade, what kind of press did their expectation for learning have on the system as a whole?
So with the variation, for the variation question, so I think we see some variation depending on what part of the state we're talking about, right? North Mississippi, more access to resources. DeSoto County is now the largest county in the state of Mississippi, urban district now. I think 10 years ago, it was not urban, right? It was considered a suburban district. Now it's an urban. In central Mississippi, Jackson Public Schools was considered an urban. It was the largest district 10, 15 years ago. Now, because of population attrition, it's considered a suburban district, and the population has significantly shrank. And so you see the variations based on the resources that are available. Unfortunately, I think because the state is still deploying those coaches into those areas that have the highest amount of needs, that those areas are making great strides. For instance, Jefferson Davis County in South Mississippi, one of the poorest districts in the state, highest level of adult illiteracy, is now an A district. It was an F district. But they attribute their gains to their literacy coaching supports, right? So not only did the literacy coach support the teachers, but we had a literacy coach who actually transitioned out and became the principal of the school, right? So now they're able, and now she's in central office, and she's replicating the supports across the district. So you're seeing the district make shifts, and they're replicating it across into middle schools, looking at an adolescent policy. So the variation, it depends on what type of capacity and the knowledge that the leaders bring and the supports that are provided within the confines of this district. Second question, can you repeat it for me? Because I'm old.
Basically, I'm just wondering, one way to think about your work is that you, year over year, are creating these incredible cadres of third graders and who have a different expectation about what instruction means and what learning means for them. They land in fourth grade, fifth grade, sixth grade. Are they a force for change?
Yes, they are a force for change. And then also, I think the thing that we recognize very early on is that, yeah, when these kids move on to fourth and fifth, sixth grade, as they, matriculate up, we needed to ensure that we provided supports to those fourth, fifth, sixth grade middle school teachers as well. So we started out only focusing on K-3, and probably by year 6, we recognized, okay, no, we need to provide supports as you go up. So we offered professional learning to those teachers in those grade levels. We ensured that we developed our SPEDIG coaches, which are our special education coaches, for 4th through grade 8. They couldn't come to their training by themselves. Those special education teachers had to bring their general ed teachers, partners with them. So again, we were expanding our supports exponentially using a very small piece of funding to try to ensure that we were getting to the upper grades as well. And you see it in those 8th grade test scores as well, right?
Not as awesome, but still amazing improvement at 8th grade. Last question.
And my question actually builds on that too. As the mom of a now 5th grader who has struggled to read from the very beginning, is consistently behind, I'm really grateful for the work that you all are doing. And I'd love to hear more about the adolescent literacy policy and what that looks like, what challenges you're encountering, because I think in our own work, elementary teachers expect to teach reading and literacy. When you get into middle and high, I'm a content teacher, here's the thing I'm passionate about. Don't necessarily see teaching reading as part of the job per se, so there's an identity shift that also has to happen. So I'm just curious if you could speak to some of those challenges and how you're thinking about them.
As a former math teacher, I can attest to that because I remember my principal one day saying, you need to devote 10 minutes a day to reading in your math course. And my response was, are they going to devote 10 minutes to math fluency? Not the best response, but it is a mindset shift, right? That we are all reading teachers. If my students can't read the word problem in front of them, they're not going to be able to solve it. The literacy policy that we are waiting, we have a month left before we take it to the board in Maryland, but it tackles similar issues. We want to make sure every teacher is trained in the science of reading, and we provide that for free. We have a secondary science of reading course. We want to make sure that we are using diagnostic screeners for our students that are at risk and that we're creating plans for how we will intervene with those students who are not entering 4th through 12th grade ready to read their content knowledge. Any other areas you want to touch on in that?
Well, I just add that just look to Mississippi as well because they have legislation that should be coming out for an adolescent literacy policy. Maryland, we do things a little bit differently. We are leaning more heavily into policy from our state board instead of looking at legislation or statute to ensure that people get where they need to go, right? But with their adolescent literacy policy in Mississippi, they are asking, the legislature was actually asking to have an 8th grade retention piece put into and put into place. I don't know how far they will get with that. Again, it's intervention over retention, and so hopefully they can get to a point where don't have that particular gateway in place. But with in Maryland, our adolescent literacy policy, we are attempting to make it a comprehensive policy where we look at it consistently, coherently from grade pre-K to grade 12, right? Again, looking at ensuring that screening students who are at risk, but not over-prescribing or over-screening students who don't necessarily need the assessment. It's a delicate, very delicate procedure, like an operation, so to speak, right? So we are really being very thoughtful and strategic as we develop this policy out, so that we are not being too prescriptive to our LEAs where it becomes cost prohibitive, as well as kills their master scheduling, right? The master schedule, it runs everything, and it has become sort of our one barrier that's probably the biggest hurdle that we have to undertake as we move in this work.
If you can't allocate time to it, it ain't gonna happen.
Yeah, exactly.
I know everyone here is excited to continue to learn with you about how implementing this work in Maryland is going to go. So please consider this an open invitation and make your way back and let us know what you're learning along the way and shifts that you're making, because we need to understand all of that too. And we're super excited about having these same kind of thrilling results in Maryland and in many other places from that point on. So join me in thanking our team for coming, being a part of this conversation.
High Tech High Unboxed is hosted by me, Alec Patton. Our theme music is by Brother Herschel. Huge thanks to Derek Mitchell, Tenette Smith, and Elise Brown for this conversation. You can find a link to learn more about continuous improvement in the show notes. Thanks for listening.